Welcome. This is the Drupal usability meeting for June 16th, 2023. Had the browser open to the wrong issue. Yes, today's the 16th. I'm Benji Fisher, moderating and sharing my screen, and also present are Quinn Pham and Ralph Kohler. So let's start off by returning to the issue we were discussing last week. It is 256287. I can paste that into the Zoom chat as well. This issue is to give roles a description value. And let's see, if we look at the current version of Drupal, if you go to people and roles, there's just a list of the roles by name and then the operations, which allow you to edit permissions, or translate. And the proposal is to add another column to this table with a description. Let me just open the screenshot. And what we discussed last week is that this seems like a good idea, but the suggested descriptions are pretty minimal. Of course, the descriptions will be editable by the site administrators, so they can make them more meaningful, but we'd like to start off with something a little more contentful, right? Administrators, the role given to admin users. The description isn't really adding anything to the name. Quinn, Ralph, were you both here last week?
No, I was not. I was still in Pittsburgh.
Okay.
I've pasted the link to the doc. I wasn't there.
So Quinn, any questions about what the problem is and what we're trying to do?
So we are trying to come up with the meaningful description.
Yes.
Okay. No question. I'll think about the sentence.
Okay, so we had this Google Doc we were using to work on, and I think some edits have been made over the past week. And I think we shouldn't spend too much time trying to get it perfect. Let's just get something that's an improvement over what's currently in the issue and make the recommendation and move this issue forward. Oh, and I see that Offer Shal has just joined us. Welcome, Offer. So briefly, Offer, the idea is that on the page that lists the roles, this issue is about adding a column. And here's a screenshot showing a description column has been added. And we'd like to have something more meaningful than the role given to admin users as the description for the administrator role. And again, we were working on this last week. We have several suggestions. Let's just choose something and put it in the issue. So see, why is this highlighted? Is that just because, Ralph, you put a comment on it, or
because there's also a comment.
Okay. And is this what you would like to recommend?
One idea, the first part is I'm picking up the pattern used in the sentence before and in the authenticated part. And in the second part, I just try to make it more explicit what the actual things are people are able to do as anonymous users.
Okay, I would like to suggest a few further changes, and I'm sorry that I didn't have time to do this over the course of the last week, but whoops, I thought I had copied that. First of all, oh, interesting. It got the highlighting. First of all, a pair of words should be hyphenated when it's used as an adjective, but that's not what we're doing here. A logged in user would have a hyphen, but a user who is not logged in should not have the hyphen. And then on the theory that less is more, I don't think we need to make the distinction between comment media and comments. I guess maybe use the site-wide contact form and search. So a little less detail for the sake of brevity. Ralph, do you think that's a terrible change?
Technically, media and comments could be filed under content. So yeah, it would be okay. It just depends how verbose or brief the other descriptions will be. So
yeah, I don't think we have to give a complete description. You know, one can always view the actual list of permissions, and that is the definitive source of what permissions the role has. So I would prefer to keep it brief, but I'm not always right. Quinn, Offer, do you have opinions? Do you like the longer version, the shorter version?
How brief? I just posted on the chat. I mean, I like it short and simple, but I don't. My sentence is just way too short. But yeah, just a suggestion.
So you have linked the Google Doc. You could put it in yourself, but I'll do it for you.
Okay, I'll do it next time.
Maybe I missed the context from before, but does anonymous always can you view published content?
Well, this would be part of configuration in the standard profile. So the descriptions, I think, should reflect what the standard profile gives them.
Yeah, but I'm just thinking, let's say I started with that, and then for whatever reason I need everything secured, you know, it's an intranet, then I will still have these descriptions, right?
Yes, and I think that's on the same role that if you go to structure, content types, if you use a basic page for something very different from this, for example, if basic pages use layout builder and you use them as landing pages, then you can change this. If you don't bother to change the description, it's on you. If you don't care about the descriptions, then it's okay just to
Yeah,
leave it like.
I'm feeling like I totally get it. I think for people maybe less, I don't know if less, but some people might freak out when they know they have an intranet site, but someone did not update the description.
So you would want to totally leave out the second part of the sentence and just.
Yeah, because I do think that these roles represent, right? How do we identify, are you admin, authenticated, or anonymous? Like there are different, what you want to do with each one is all up to the settings. I wish there was a way to kind of by default or I don't know if we had it somewhere with Christina. I remember we had a discussion like that where maybe standard role setting is being applied and then it actually matches. And once you're not there, it's not. But I don't think this is coming soon. You know, kind of a recipe for a bundle of settings that when you put them, yes, that's right. Or like a lot of sites would need anonymous to be able to view published content and all that.
So we could do something like add by default. Whoops. That delete key. Sort of hedge our bets, or it might be safest just not to say anything about the current permissions, and if they want to see what the permissions are, look at the actual list. Or we could go back to something like this. A visitor who is not logged in has this role, and then this role is typically given permissions to view content and sometimes to add comments.
Yeah, I don't remember the last time I used comments module, but yeah, I'm connected more to that description. That's my vote.
So you like this one near the top?
Yeah.
Quinn, Ralph, opinions?
I'm kind of like the last one by default. The unlock visitor can view content, because it's we are all admins and we go and we rather read something short and simple.
And Thomas has joined us too. Thomas, we're continuing the discussion from last week, and it's not as brief as I had hoped it would be. People still have very different opinions on what the default descriptions should be for the user roles.
Do we have any examples of what something like this looks in other software?
Of course, Drupal's permission system is sort of unique, that I don't think anyone else has this robust a permission system. Well, certainly not WordPress.
Yes. I was just thinking of other systems because there's a lot of authentication systems out there. I didn't know if any of them, like Okta or Shibboleth, I don't know where the current state of industry softwares might be, but sorry for asking.
No, it's a good point to bring up. I'm sorry I don't have any answers. Anyone else?
Obviously talking about my point, but I think there's a difference between describing what we're seeing and getting into the documentation part of training and teaching people Drupal. Where to me a description is like, this is what this does. Because everything is flexible, we don't have an automatic way to tell you what it's going to be. We might say by default or typically what it does.
Ralph, go ahead.
I agree to tell the user what a role does. And I think we are describing the standard profile, and that way it should be clear to the person what a role covers on a brief look. And if the person then changes the permissions to something else, it's up to the user to basically update the description to reflect that. But I think it should still reflect the standard profile and what the permissions are there. And one comment about the second anonymous suggestion and the third, I have a rather big problem with sometimes to add comments. That doesn't feel right. Comments is okay, but sometimes I have questions.
Okay, so let's have a vote. So Ralph is arguing that this is configuration, this is part of the standard profile. We should say something about the actual permissions provided by the standard profile. And Offer was arguing that there's too much danger that this will get out of date and people will worry about it. So, and any further comments on that choice? Because I'd like to sort of settle that and decide whether or not to mention specific permissions before we go any further. So go ahead, Thomas.
I think that the main concern I have is if you can infer most of what the permissions are, it's less about specific permissions and more about the intent of the role from my perspective. Like it's just I'm trying to think of it from the perspective of someone who's never used a robust permissioning system before and just trying to understand what does anonymous mean. And anonymous has like a very specific meaning. Authenticated has a very specific meaning. And the other things are roles, and you add those to authenticated because you're not going to add content editor to anonymous. At least I guess in theory, but by default, you definitely are not going to. So to me, then it's like trying to define, okay, anonymous, it's telling people that anonymous is a special role and everyone has it, or they have authenticated. And that's the information that I'd really want to be there. So, because that's something you cannot glean from the permissions themselves. So to me, the description should be the information that you need to know that you can't learn just by looking at the permissions matrix.
Okay, and Ralph is in the chat agreeing with what you're saying. So aim more for the idea of what the role is supposed to be used for, not specific permissions. And yes, I agree that we have to make the distinction that every user is either anonymous or authenticated. I also think it's important to mention that the administrator has all permissions. And then there's the content editor role, which is just whatever permissions you give it is in that role. So Quinn agrees with Thomas and is thinking of the use case of a first-time site builder. So let's do this. Let's start with something sort of minimal. So we are at least going to say the special things about these two roles, that users who are not logged in get the anonymous role. Users who are logged in have the authenticated role. And this role has all permissions. So let's start with that. And then think about additional things. So maybe we shouldn't say anything additional for anonymous or authenticated. And maybe we like visitors better than users. Maybe we should say who rather than that. And let's make it a full sentence. This role is given to visitors who are not logged in. Or alternatively, I guess this is slightly shorter. A visitor who is not logged in has this role. So let's start there. We might add to it either way, or we might not. But let's start by choosing between these two. Who prefers the first one? You can speak up or give a thumbs up in Zoom or.
I like the first one because it's like accent verb.
Okay, Quinn likes the first, and if you don't say anything, I'll just assume you don't have an opinion between the two. Ralph, go ahead.
Just one note, by front loading that this role inherits the potential problem that other descriptions start with the same, and the gist of the role is then moved to the back of the sentence, and that way it might be harder to process for readers in regards of readability.
Okay, so boilerplate text, which might apply to every single line, should not be at the start, should be at the end of the sentence.
Yep.
So you prefer the second?
Yeah.
Okay, I think if no one else wants to have an opinion, I'm convinced by Ralph. And also by the slightly shorter text. This is even shorter than it looks because there we go. So a visitor who is not logged in has this role. Let's unbold this. And then this part is similar. I'd like to suggest this. All logged in users have this role. Do you like that? Thomas, go ahead.
So this is a little bit different, and so I'm not sure if I want to make the suggestion. I feel that this is an opportunity with authenticated to indicate that the word user is what you become by logging in. So all visitors who log in become users in my mind. Because that helps to differentiate conceptually that anonymous is really intentionally built for people who don't use the site so much as visit the site, and that just differentiates it. And it turns logged in into a verb.
So what exactly are you suggesting?
All visitors who log in are site users. And you don't even have to say, we don't have to end with the have this role. Are site users, yeah. Or are site users with this role. But it makes it visually very different.
Right, and so by being different, you avoid the problem that it's a whole lot of boilerplate text that just has a few words different from one to the next,
And
which makes the eyes glaze over. Go ahead.
And we don't have to say anonymous and authenticated, like, and maybe we still need that, but I'm trying to not have to write it explicitly that these are two special use cases. But I have a feeling after that, we can then start to come up with a different type of approach that's consistent for all of the additional roles. So that these first two have a special look without having to explicitly state it.
Okay. Other opinions on the authenticated role? So can we have a vote between these two candidates? All logged in users have this role, or all visitors who log in are site users with this role?
Is it necessary to add the with this role at the end necessarily? And just say all visitors who log in are site users or are users of this site?
I'm okay with getting rid of it. It doesn't, yeah.
I wonder, let's have a look at documentation. And I want the curated Drupal user guide. And copyright, blah, 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 understanding Drupal, modules, themes, project Drupal licensing. Where does it talk about users, page management, content structure, user accounts, concepts, users, roles, and permissions? So I very rarely look at the user guide because it's more aimed at beginning users. But what are users? Users who are not logged in or anonymous users, users who are logged in or authenticated users, the administrative user account that was automatically created when you installed your site, or user one. Oof. I thought we were trying to get away from the special role of user one and make it a role. So if there's any terminology on this page that we can be consistent with, I think that would be a good thing.
Could you copy and paste the link into the chat, please?
Sure. There.
Thank you.
So this doesn't make a distinction between, or doesn't use the word visitor. It calls both authenticated and anonymous users. does use the phrase are or are not logged in. So I'm not getting a lot of inspiration from this page. I was hoping there would be some phrases that we could borrow.
The only detail that as a pattern that might help, for example, with the content editor role is the examples, what a role is. For example, the vendor role that allows vendors to edit their own vendor listing page, meaning to provide a general, a gist, what a role empowers someone to.
Okay, Thomas, your hand is up. Is that?
Yes.
You forgot to put it down, or go ahead.
Looking at the documentation, I'm just struck by the need to edit the documentation, which is scope creep. I I get very squirrely with the word user. I'm not. I can see how my approach may not be ideal. I'm not hearing any strong opinions from any of us as to what it should be. So I'm worried we might be bike shedding when none of us have a clear vision of how this can be better, if that makes sense. So I guess really the question that I feel like we're trying to answer is, should we use the word user in both anonymous and authenticated, or should we not? Or should they be differentiated in some way, which is what I was trying to do with visitor versus user. Whatever we do, if we choose to change or differentiate the two, then we're going to have to open a second or a side issue to get the documentation updated, because I think that what we don't want to do is introduce text here that looks radically different than what's like. I would suggest that this gets updated to the documentation so these mirror one another.
So you would just like to use
I don't want to use this. I'm saying we should either use this or we're going to need to change this to match what we're suggesting. And so if we want to keep it simple, the question becomes, does the sentence users who are not logged in make cognitive sense to a new uninitiated person coming into Drupal? So if that sentence is good, we don't need the or anonymous users. We just would, the definition or description would be users who are not logged in. Is that good enough, or do we think it needs to change?
I don't especially like that, because I think a description should be a full sentence, which this is not.
Agreed. But then I would suggest that we tweak this and then we update documentation with the second issue.
Okay, so I feel free to file an issue to update the documentation. That's has its own separate process. Right, this part of the documentation is not the wiki where anyone can go in and edit the page. You have to create an issue and discuss it to update this.
Yeah.
So
though to change that sentence, if we wanted to fix it, we could say a visitor is a user who is not logged in, and then authenticated is a visitor who is logged in, and then that creates that binary. Not sure I love it, but that would make it a full sentence and would align it with what is in documentation.
Okay, so let's go with what we think is the best text. So I forget, what did we decide on anonymous? Did we decide on the first or the second?
You prefer the second because it backloads has this role.
That's right. And I was agreeing with Ralph there, and Quinn and Offer didn't have opinions. So let's unfold that. And we are more than halfway through the hour. So I would like to wrap this up. And again, it doesn't have to be perfect, but I want an improvement over what's currently an issue.
Then to follow the pattern, we could just say a visitor who is logged in has this role. It's similar to the second sentence for authenticated, but follows the pattern of the first sentence.
A visitor who is logged in.
But the only nitpick in that regard is if you just skim anonymous the description and skim the authenticated the description, then it differs in just one word and might be harder to process.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think we've come up with this principle before that having a lot of descriptions that are identical except for changing one or two words is not really an effective way to communicate. It's not scannable.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
I actually think that having a different sentence structure is an advantage.
Yep.
Rather than going for consistency.
So you could say like all logged in visitors have this role. It follows the same language. Oh, but yeah, the differentiator is not. Okay. Yeah.
And we normally use user. I think the suggestion here was to use visitor sort of as an exception for the anonymous role.
Because visitor doesn't necessarily have an account that should be communicated by that indirectly.
Right. So I vote for this first one. Agree, disagree? I'm getting 2 thumbs up from Thomas and Ralph. Okay, so let me unbold these other 2.
Yeah, I like the first one.
Okay, great. And then administrator. Any alternatives to this thing that I have in bold? Ralph, go ahead.
I would just suggest to add one detail to that suggestion, to your suggestion. I've added a comment to meaning something we also added to the role settings, that all current permissions as well as all future permissions, if you add a module and install it, that those will be also added to your administrator role. That isn't communicated there.
Okay, and Thomas?
I would add in a little slightly more. You may not like this, but I would say this role gives a user all current and future permissions.
Say that again.
This role gives a user all current and future permissions. And that establishes a pattern of really everything after anonymous and authenticated are roles that are modifying something. And I think that's something that isn't clear with the other descriptions. Every person is going to be either anonymous or authenticated. You don't log in and lose authenticated and get administrator. Administrator gets added to authenticated. It took me a long time to understand that nuance of the Drupal permissioning system. It makes every other role an add-on, whereas the first two roles are baked in. You have to have one or the other.
So I wonder if we should add to this. Authentic. I didn't want bold. Authenticated users may have additional roles. Do you think we should add something like that?
I'm not 100% on the words, but I think conceptually that is important.
Yeah. That all other given roles extend the capabilities of the user.
Or how about all logged in user? Let me make it bold. All logged in users have this role. And may have additional roles.
I like that.
Other opinions? Do you prefer this to the original shorter version?
Yeah, I like the first one. It's simple but conveys enough meanings.
Do you like this one?
Yes.
Having trouble triple clicking to select the line. Why is this not working? There we go. Okay, so Quinn and Thomas, you both like this one?
Yes.
Okay, let's go with that. Unbold. So back to administrator. This role has all permissions. A user with this role has all permissions. This role gives the user all current and future permissions. A user has all current and future permissions. A user with this role can manage site structure and configuration.
Or how about
I think that last one is too long.
Yes, I'm trying to just a tryout to use the automatically permission, because like Thomas said, when we somehow we need to put the current permission as well as the future permission, but it's automatically granted.
Oops. I didn't mean to do that. So I don't know whether we want to introduce the idea that permissions are created by modules, which is true, but maybe this isn't the right place to try to explain that. But if we say from all enabled modules, I guess I don't like the idea of future permissions. And this is a little more technically accurate, that if you enable a module now or in the future, but if you have an enabled module, then and it provides permissions, those permissions will be assigned to a user with the administrator role. And I think my preference is still for the bolded one. It's short. In my opinion, all permissions is clear enough and doesn't need the qualification of permissions that might be added in the future. But again, that's just my opinion. I'm not always right. So, and someone is typing a, I guess, what I was looking at just one way. So, okay, so administrator role. My preference is for short and sweet. Who else has a favorite among current options? You can just go into the Google Doc and bold one of the lines if you like. Ralph, go ahead.
Just one comment. Per se, I agree that has all permissions is good, but I dislike that it starts with this role. And in contrast, technically, I like the suggestion I made with all the current and future permissions, but I agree that the future permissions part is suboptimal and also not desired. But yeah, still this role has all permissions. With this role, I'm not very content with. Oh, all that way.
So if we put,
and if you use are granted to this role, that way it implies that other roles could be added to the list.
you mean other permissions, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, right, sorry.
Okay, so you like this variant?
Yes.
Okay. Anyone else?
Yes, if we aim for short and simple, I like this row has all permissions. but again, it doesn't say much.
All right, Quinn, what do you think about this alternative? All permissions are granted to this role. Like, again, putting this role at the end.
Yeah, I like this one better. Kind of mimic the to this role as a little bit consistency we have on the top.
Okay, Thomas?
I would shift it. I don't like the all because then it matches what's under authenticated. And I do something like grants all permissions to this role. Because you're starting authenticated with all.
All logged in users.
So I would say grants all permissions to this role.
Even shorter.
Grants all permissions to this role.
What I like about grants is it does what extends does in my attempted sentence. It gives you a verb change from how authenticated and anonymous are. So you see that it's granting these versus, because what I don't like is under, I see, one of the earlier ones was like a user, like sorry, this works.
I'm stubbornly not putting a period on that because it's not a full sentence.
Sentence.
There's no subject.
Grants a user all permissions to this role, or grants an authenticated user all permissions to this role, which states specifically what it does. You can't give it to anonymous, so we can safely say grants an authenticated or grants a logged in. But I like the idea of grants an authenticated because it establishes the pattern of modifying, like all future roles modify authenticated.
Ralph?
On one hand, I agree that authenticated might be desirable, but still we introduced visitors for unauthenticated users in the beginning, and that way I'm not sure if it's necessary to use authenticated there, and it's shorter and just go with users. It might be enough.
Yeah, I also think that if you establish that pattern, then we've already said that authenticated users are all logged in users and they have additional roles. If you then mention authenticated users here, you're establishing a pattern. Every other role is going to have to mention authenticated users, and then we're in the boilerplate problem, too much repetitive text. Instead of has all permissions, what if we just change that to grants? Does that suggest more that when permissions are added, they will automatically be given?
Except
Yeah,
for
I like that.
we're still stuck with the pattern of this role grants. Well, then everything subsequent could be this role grants.
And also, it sounds like the role is giving new permissions, and I'm
That's
not
what
sure
it does.
if
That's accurate. A role does give permissions.
true, but still, I'm front loading this role. I'm not a fan.
Yeah. On the other hand, all permissions are granted to this role is the passive voice. So I agree that I'd rather front load the all permissions, but if we can think of a way to do it without the passive voice, I would be happier.
That's why I like grants a user all permissions.
We need to choose one. Oh, and we are very close to the end of the hour. We are not going to have a chance to talk about any other issues. And we just can't seem to get a great consensus on this. I'm not sure that there's any option here that has 2 votes.
Can we sleep on it and come back next?
Yeah, we can. We suggested that last week, and Ralph and Aaron made some comments on the Google Doc over the course of the week, or at least on the 9th and the 10th.
So my complaint about the bolded one is all. I just don't like 2 things starting with all. Is there a way of, is there a synonym for all that we can put in place of all permissions? Just something.
Every permission.
Every permission is granted to this role? Sure.
So I think we'll just have to leave it there. I was hoping we could come up with something to agree on, but I guess it's just not going to happen. So we'll try to work this out and not spend another whole meeting on it. Let me just briefly say, what did Christina give us? So this is issue 3366986, the card sorting survey. And you might want to have a look at this sometime over the next few days, which is just to help decide on the menu structure for the admin toolbar. And not only do it yourself, but also encourage other people at your company or your Drupal user groups to fill out the survey. And it's the end of the hour. Thank you all.
Yes, I already had and forward to a few people.
Great, thank you. And maybe next week, Christina Chimias will be able to join us, and we can talk about the admin menu and the block layout that we were trying to move under appearance. Okay. Till next week. Bye.
Have a nice week.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.